You've probably already seen guilds dispatching the hard modes in Ulduar with ease, but then you actually attempt these hard modes and it feels like an impossible task. The real issue isn't the mechanics. The problem is that your guild wasn't actually playing optimally in Naxxramas. I'm gonna solve the major issues holding your guild back from clearing hard modes. First up, simple mistakes. To stand in Blizzard on Zaffiron, you barely lose any health. Try to cleave and get battle rezzed, it's fine. But these bad habits are unacceptable in hard modes where extra damage feels unhealable and a death feels like game over. On General Vezek's hard mode, for example, even a few players getting hit by Shadow Crash is a fiasco for the healer's mana. The solutions? Research the boss abilities, get a weak aura pack, and remind people on voice, since the tiny mistakes really add up. Speaking of tiny mistakes, your DPS is making tons of mistakes that are costing you big time. Take pre-pots, for example. Your guild needs to know exactly when to pre-pot during the pull timer. This needs to be 100% consistent and drilled into your guild, since missing pre-pots means failing hard modes. And then there's positioning, which becomes glaringly obvious on fights like Hodir and Iron Council. Not only do DPS need to master their rotations, but they also need to plan out exactly how they're going to move during hard modes. If every raider really understands how to move on each fight to maximize their uptime and buffs, your raid's DPS will go up by thousands. Then we have suboptimal engineering usage. Seemingly everybody raiding has engineering, so why do the logs look so inconsistent from player to player? Everyone needs to be using their haste gloves, their sapper, and their grenade every fight. Wasteful buffs are another mistake that adds up. Power Infusion isn't just a cute buff to parse 99s, it's a necessary tool to amp up your warlocks. The same goes for other abilities like Tricks of the Trade, Innervate, even Pain Suppression. Know who gets each buff and give them out at the same time every fight. And if your bloodlusts aren't scripted and being used at exactly the optimal time per boss, you can kiss that Constellus goodbye. Another lust tip, don't forget a second lust for summons later in the fight if you have 2 shamans. Subscribe to the video, give it a like, and hit the notification bell or your bloodlust will be late every fight. Scripting the fights. This leads into the next major optimization issue, not scripting out your fights. This just isn't freeform jazz. This is the static boss with the same abilities every time. Every major defensive cooldown, every damage buff, everything needs to be scripted. DSEC isn't a bonus on fights like XT Hard Mode, and Divine Him isn't a fun ability to press whenever you feel like it. It's saved for that ever so precarious Hodir moment. When you map out the fights, you can focus on the boss mechanics instead of thinking about what spell to press next. My Ulduar comprehensive guide will help you to plan out which cooldowns to use on every trash pack and boss. Check it out below the video. Cooldowns. Another huge mistake your guild is making is not going into the boss attempts with every cooldown available. This tip comes from my friend Aladar. Abilities like Fire Elemental and Infernal can be reset in seconds with a Wargame macro. Your raid leader just needs to make 2 groups of players with abilities that don't reset after wipes. Then the raid leader macro kicks each group and they initiate a Wargame together and AFK out. The full cooldowns for bosses like Hodir will really make a huge difference during progression. Though you really shouldn't be spending time resetting like this until you're close to a boss kill. Another huge issue for Ulduar hard modes is that you aren't assigning roles or people are ignoring them. Unlike in Naxxramas, assigning roles to players really matters in Ulduar. Making weekly assignments on a spreadsheet is great, but you also need your raiders to actually follow the assignments too. Assign to a kick but don't do it? That's a raid wipe. Assign to heal only the main tank but you decide to pad the meters instead? That's a raid wipe. Keep your raiders accountable and actually check the logs after raid night to make sure your assignments are being followed. And then follow me to my mistakes to avoid in Ulduar video to tighten up your raid even further.